I had never given my boyfriend's ex much thought. I knew her name was Lena, and I knew they had been together for 3 years before splitting up 6 months prior to our meeting. I knew he didn't like talking about her, so I didn't push why he would, but that was before the message before Lena vanished. On a Thursday night, I was at home, curled up on the couch, scrolling through my phone while waiting for Owen to come over. I had had a long day at work and was partially preoccupied by a reality show playing in the background. Initially, I thought it was spam, but something forced me to check the unknown number. "I must speak with you about Owen." I clenched my fingers around my phone. I hesitated before responding to Owen, my lover, but he almost instantly gave me an unfamiliar number. Lena, Owen's ex, and I had never talked or met before, and as far as I knew, she didn't even reside in the city anymore. Why was she messaging me now? 1,000 questions crossed my mind, but before I could send a reply, I scowled, knowing that he was lying when he said that I'm insane, jealous, and unable to let go. I thought that was because it had been a difficult breakup because Owen had never really talked about her at all. He had only ever mentioned that things ended badly and he didn't want to bring it up, but he had never called her crazy. Was she assuming he did? I stared at the message, not knowing what to say, and then another text from Lena. "I can't tell more, but please believe me when I advise that you must exercise caution." I felt a shiver of caution about him, but before I could write anything, my phone chimed again. I read the message again, my pulse racing, and it seemed like a warning. If anything were to happen to me, don't trust what he says. A frantic one, followed by quiet. I wrote back, "What do you mean?" but got no reply. A cold pit formed in my stomach as I waited for the typing bubble to appear on the computer. I dialed the number, but it only rang once before going straight to voicemail. A tap at the door almost made me jump. My heart was still pounding as I glanced up at the message. Oh, and I took a deep breath trying to steady myself before getting up and opening the door. He smiled at me, the same easy, charming smile that had drawn me in when we first met. "Hey babe." For the first time I hesitated before letting him, and I wanted to ask him about Lena, about what had happened between them, about why she would send me a message like that, but I didn't. Instead, I forced a smile and stepped aside, letting him inside, because I needed more time to think, because I wasn't ready to hear his answer, because for the first time since I met him I wasn't sure I wanted to know the truth. I tried to act normal. I let Owen and kissed him on the cheek and pretended like everything was fine, but inside my mind was racing. Lena's message was burnt into my brain. "You need to be careful, please. I can't say more. Just trust me. If anything happens to me, don't believe what he tells you." I sat across from Owen, on the couch, pretending to listen as he talked about his day. He was laughing about something a coworker did, completely unaware of the tight knot in my stomach. I wanted to ask him, I wanted to demand answers, but I hesitated. What if Lena was lying? What if she really was just the jealous ex? Would bringing it up make me seem paranoid, or worse, would it make Owen angry? I nodded when appropriate and attempted a grin, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Lena never responded to my texts, so I kept checking my phone until Owen noticed everything was fine. He asked, gesturing toward my phone, and I nodded too quickly and unnaturally. "Yeah, just work stuff," I said, lying. He held my gaze for a second longer than usual, then smiled and stretched, wrapping an arm around me as if nothing was wrong, but I couldn't relax when she vanished the following day. I tried calling her again, but the number went straight to voicemail. I checked her social media, but there were no updates, and I even Googled her name, but nothing strange turned up. She simply stopped talking to me. I told myself that I was overreacting and that perhaps she had changed her mind about warning me. If Owen didn't tell me, maybe someone else would, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something wasn't right, so I decided to find out more about their breakup. That afternoon, I discovered Mia, who was, at least based on social media, one of Lena's old friends because they used to tag each other in posts and comment on each other's photos. I messaged her, "Hey, this is really random, but I wanted to ask you something about Lena. I've been dating Owen, and I was hesitant to continue until she sent me a strange message the other day. She seemed afraid of him, but she isn't responding. I just wanted to know if you've spoken to her recently." I stared at my phone, waiting, and Mia read the message almost instantly. After a long pause, she began typing, "Get away from him." My blood ran cold. Get away from him, please. My heart is pounding in my ears, and I'm holding onto my phone harder. What happened? Do you know? Mia, she was afraid of him. He never physically assaulted her, as far as I know, but he was domineering. He would gaslight her, isolate her, and track her phone, showing up at unexpected locations. When she finally ended their relationship, she vowed that he was still watching her, and I swallowed hard because that didn't sound like the owl. But did I really know him? I paused before typing one more. She told me that she had to caution me not to trust him if anything were to happen to her. Mia responded very immediately, and then she got into trouble. Lena hadn't been lying. She wasn't just some jealous ex attempting to frighten me away. She was scared, and now she was gone. This made me feel terrible. With my hands shaking, I sat motionless on my couch and read through the messages again. I needed to talk to Owen and find out what he wasn't telling me, but if Lena was right and Owen was truly dangerous, then facing him head-on could be the worst thing I've ever done. I was at a loss for what to do next, so I just stared at my phone screen while Mia's words kept repeating in my mind. She's in trouble. Lena had attempted to warn me, but since she was no longer with me, I had to decide whether to face Owen or call the police. I had a gut sense that something was really wrong, but I had no evidence other than a few texts. I took a deep breath and performed the one action I should have taken sooner. The last time I called Lena's number, I didn't expect a response. This time, the phone rang twice, then 3 times, and then someone answered. I jumped up and said, "I'm almost breathless, and I can hear faint, shaky breathing like someone was trying to stay quiet." I swallowed hard. "Lena, are you okay? Where are you?" A chill went through my entire body, and before she could answer, the call cut off. I stood there, my heart pounding, and I dialed 911 right away. When the dispatcher answered, I forced myself to speak clearly. I explained that my boyfriend's ex-girlfriend was missing, and that she tried to warn me about him. I called her, and she answered, but she sounded scared. The dispatcher took me seriously and asked for details. I told them all I knew, including Lena's full name, Owen, and the last time I saw her, and then something occurred to me. Owen had mentioned that Lena still had some of her old things in a storage unit. What if she was there? I told the dispatcher send officers to check it out. She assured me. I felt like I could finally breathe. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed. An officer named Detective Ellis called me back. We found her. He said. I nearly collapsed onto the couch in relief. Is she okay? She's shaken up, he admitted, but she's alive. I shut my eyes, trying to steady myself. Where was she? I asked. There was a long pause, and then the words that made my blood run cold. In Owen's storage unit. I sat there gripping the phone. She was locked inside. I whispered. Yeah. The detective sighed. She was dehydrated, scared out of her mind, but she said she had only been there since last night. That means someone put her there recently. I felt sick. Owen, that's what we're going to find out. That night Owen was arrested, and the police questioned him. He denied everything, said he had no idea how Lena got into his storage unit, but the evidence stacked against him. Elena told the police he had been stalking her for months. He would show up at her work, her gym, even outside her apartment. She had blocked his number, but he always found ways to contact her. And when she sent me that warning message, he must have found out, because that night she had been walking home and someone had grabbed her. Someone had thrown her into his storage unit and left her there. She may not have arrived if I hadn't phoned, and the police hadn't checked, but it took some time before Owen was charged with abduction and illegal confinement. Following months of court fights, Owen was given an 8-year jail term after Lena and I both testified against him. Lena tried to warn me, and because I listened, she's still alive, and Owen is exactly where he belongs. I haven't spoken to him since his arrest because I don't want to, but occasionally I wonder what would have happened if I had disregarded her message that night and written her off as just another resentful ex. I've never given grocery shopping much thought. I simply go in, get what I need, and go. It's a normal, monotonous experience, which is why I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary when I entered the store that evening, just after 8 p.m. A few people were milling about, pushing carts, checking labels, and going about their own business while the fluorescent lights cast a dull glow over the aisles. I grabbed a basket and began going through my list, which included bread, eggs, coffee, and the usual. Nothing unusual. But after 10 minutes or so, I heard the intercom crackle to life and a voice speaking overhead. "Please come to the store's front, Alex." The voice stated my name clearly, and I briefly paused, thinking I had misheard. I looked around, expecting to see someone searching for me, possibly a colleague who had seen me shopping or someone I knew making a joke, but nobody was listening. Customers scarcely noticed the news as they continued with their daily activities. When I got to the customer service desk, the woman behind the counter smiled politely and asked if I could help someone named Alex. I said, "Someone just called my name over the intercom," and she blinked, but I don't think I heard it, so I frowned. I didn't make any announcements, and as far as I know, no one else did either. I looked at the intercom phone that was on the desk with the receiver still in place, and I looked around at the staff behind the registers, but none of them seemed to be paying any attention to me. Who had called my name if no one had made the announcement? The woman behind the customer service desk hesitated, then looked at her coworkers. One of the managers, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a tired expression, walked over. "Everything okay?" I repeated what had happened, expecting him to at least take it seriously, but he just gave me a puzzled look. I stood there for a few seconds trying to process what the cashier had just said. No one had made an announcement. That wasn't possible, and I had heard it clearly as day. I asked, my voice coming out tighter than I intended. The intercom is only accessible by employees, and none of us have used it in the last 10 minutes. I looked at the other employees behind the registers, and they were all busy scanning groceries and assisting customers. None of them seemed even remotely interested in me. We don't have any record of an announcement being made. Do you record them? I asked. He shook his head no. I stroked the back of my neck in an attempt to get rid of the nagging anxiety. If none of you announced it, how did my name be called? The manager exhaled slowly as if he was trying to be patient. Perhaps you misheard? Occasionally, the system detects interference or static. I almost believed him, but static doesn't say my name, so I forced a nod despite my gut telling me something wasn't right. Maybe he then turned back to the customer service representative and said, "If you need anything else, let us know." That was it. The conversation ended, and I left feeling foolish. I could have misheard or imagined it, but as I grabbed my basket and made my way back toward the aisles, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I was being watched. The store's usual hum felt different, and every little sound made me tense. When I arrived at the self-checkout, I felt uneasy due to the beeping of the registers and the soft rustling of the things being stocked. I was nearly finished scanning my items with unsteady hands when the intercom crackled once again. "Alex, please come to the front of the store." I whipped my head up so fast my vision blurred. It was the same voice, calm, even unnerving. I turned toward the customer service desk expecting the employees to react, but no one did. Not a single person even looked up. My heart pounded. I looked around the store searching for anyone who had heard it too. Nothing. It was like I was the only one who had heard my name. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to breathe. I needed to get out of here now. I grabbed my hurried toward the exit and pushed through the automatic doors into the cold night air. The parking lot was mostly empty, a few scattered cars, the glow of the street light stretching long eerie shadows across the pavement. I reached my car and unlocked it with shaking hands, throwing my groceries into the passenger seat. I sat there for a moment trying to slow my breathing. What the hell just happened? Then, out of habit, I checked my phone. I wish I hadn't, because there was a new notification on my screen, a text message from an unknown number. "You forgot something, Alex." I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. I didn't respond, didn't move. Then another message, "Turn around." I didn't. I threw the car into reverse and sped out of the parking lot, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I didn't stop until I was halfway home, heart hammering in my chest. I forced myself to glance in my rearview mirror. The parking lot was far behind me, empty, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I didn't go straight home. Something told me that would be a mistake. Instead, I drove to a well-lit gas station a few miles away, pulled into a spot near the entrance, and locked my doors. I went for my phone while my hands were still trembling. I looked at the previous message, turned around, and wasn't ready to start. Taking a deep breath, I tapped on the unknown number and blocked the person, preventing them from contacting me again. I then retrieved my call log and dialed the local police department's non-emergency number. "What's your emergency?" I was unsure of what to respond after hearing my name yelled over the shop intercom and receiving a spooky text. None of that was illegal, but I sensed something wasn't quite right. I said, "Hello, I think someone has been following me." The dispatcher's tone changed right away. "Are you in a safe place?" I asked. "I'm at a gas station. Can you describe what's happening?" I exhaled slowly. "At the grocery store, someone called my name over the intercom twice. When I asked the staff, they informed me that no one had made the announcement. After I left, I received a text from an unknown number saying, I forgot something and instructed me to turn around. Do you think someone might have been watching you inside the store? I swallowed hard. Did you notice anyone following you to your car? I thought back to those final few moments in the parking lot. The prolonged dark shadows. Do you want us to send an officer to look at the shop surveillance footage? I went quickly, so I wasn't searching for the eerie emptiness. I questioned whether they would even do that if you felt unsafe, because we take that seriously. She asked if you wanted an officer to meet you where you were. I looked around the gas station and saw some people coming in and going out, as well as cars pulling up to the pumps. I told her that I wasn't alone, but that it would be helpful if someone could look at the video. She took down the information and promised to follow up with the store. The next day, I received a call from an unknown number, which briefly made my stomach turn, but then I learned it was the police department, so I responded right away. "Hello, this is Officer Reynolds." I thanked her and hung up, but even as I sat there locked in my vehicle, I felt watched. "You reported a suspicious incident at the grocery store last night." I asked quickly if you had found anything. The officer paused, and we looked at the security footage. He said slowly, "You were right, no employees used the intercom." I shuddered when your name was called. I already knew that, but hearing it confirmed made my skin crawl. However, we did discover something else, and the way he said it chilled my blood. "You left the store at 8:52 p.m. We don't know," the officer said, adding that he kept his head down the entire time with his hood pulled over his face so no one recognized him. He said that at 8:54, a man left the store through a side entrance, walked to the parking lot, and stopped at the edge to watch your car as you drove away. I gripped my phone tighter. I took a deep breath. Did he follow me? We don't believe so. According to Reynolds, he stayed there for long before leaving the camera. We're attempting to follow him on the other security cameras. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding, and he called my name. We don't know how he did it, but he acknowledged that the intercom system isn't wireless and must be used from one of the store's phones. We checked all of them, but I heard it. I said, barely raising my voice above a whisper, "I believe you, but we don't know how it happened yet." I shakily exhaled. "What should I do?" "Keep an eye out," he said. I thanked him and hung up, and for the next few days, I was on high alert, changing my routine, taking different routes home, and constantly checking my surroundings, but nothing happened. It's been a few months since I stopped going to that grocery store, stopped shopping at night, and never ever disregarded my gut because I know what I heard and I know someone was watching, but I'm not sure why or if they'll ever return. The person who called my name that night and stood in the parking lot watching never showed up again, or perhaps they did and I simply didn't notice. I like to think I would notice if something changed in my home. I live alone, so everything stays exactly where I leave it. If I set my keys on the counter, they'll be there when I get back. If I leave my bedroom door slightly open before bed, it will still be that way in the morning. That's why when I turned off the lights last night and glanced at my bedroom door, something immediately felt wrong. It took me a second to understand why, then my stomach dropped a dead bolt, a heavy-duty lock installed on. The outside, I stood frozen, my mind racing. I stepped closer, running my fingers over the cool metal. It wasn't mine, it wasn't supposed to be there. I would have noticed something like this before, wouldn't I? The screws looked clean, new, barely worn. I swallowed hard. Someone had installed this recently. I checked the rest of the apartment, my heart pounding. I knew I wouldn't find anything, but I needed to look. The windows locked, the front door locked, the spare key I kept hidden in a drawer still there. Everything was exactly as I had left it except for the lock on my door. I grabbed my phone and sent a text. Did maintenance come by today? There's a lock on my bedroom door that wasn't there before. No response. I checked the time, 11:47 p.m. I ran my fingers over the lock again, feeling a dull pressure in my chest. If it was maintenance, why wouldn't they tell me? If it wasn't, who did this? Why wouldn't they tell me? A lock like this only served one purpose, which was to keep someone inside. I turned the bolt to see if it worked, and it did. My throat tightened. Someone had installed this on my apartment door, and they had a key. I didn't sleep. I lay awake, eyes locked on my bedroom door, and every little sound made my skin crawl. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the pipes shifting in the walls, and the occasional creak of my neighbor's footsteps above me. Every time I heard something, I imagined a shadow standing on the other side of the door, someone waiting, someone listening, someone testing the lock. I hardly slept at all, but when my alarm went off, I had myself get out of bed. I checked my phone first, but my landlord hadn't responded. I considered phoning him, but something about this seemed too important to discuss over the phone. I had to check one more item before I went, even though I needed to meet him in person. I took my keys and went outside, shutting my bedroom door behind me. After taking a deep breath, I tested the lock and it turned easily. I felt a chill go up my spine. Whoever placed this there wasn't just trying to scare me. They wanted to make sure they could lock me inside. I left my apartment and went straight to the leasing office, where the receptionist hardly looked up from her computer. She said, "I need something," and pointed to the back, saying, "He's in his office." David scowled and pulled for his phone, saying, "I must have missed it." He glanced up from his desk, shocked that you hadn't responded to my text. "What's happening?" I paused for a while before deciding to simply say, "There's a new lock on my bedroom door." His eyebrows flew up when he saw that it wasn't there before I continued. "I'm not sure when or how, but it wasn't me." I asked David, "Do you have a list of people who have access to my apartment?" He nodded. "Just the maintenance team and me, and obviously whoever you gave a copy of your key to." I clenched my jaw. "Are you sure maintenance didn't install it?" "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't sure." He sighed and shook his head. "No one reported any work in your unit, and maintenance wouldn't just install a lock without telling you." When I asked David to check if there were any key card entries to your unit, he pulled up something on his computer and I leaned over his desk to watch the screen as he scrolled. When he stopped, his frown deepened, and I felt a chill run down my back. He said, "But it wasn't a staff key card, it was yours." I shook my head. "That's impossible, as I was at work." He gave me a perplexed look. "Are you sure?" I asked, taking out my phone and going through my messages, and then I showed him a text I had sent to a coworker at 2:30 p.m. last night. Someone had been in my apartment while I was at work, installing a lock that was intended to trap me inside. I gripped the edge of his desk, my nails digging into the wood. I told David that I wouldn't be coming home until after 6. He stared at the screen for a while before turning back to his computer. Then, someone used a duplicate of your key. I felt a chill go through me. Can you check security cameras? I questioned him. You should probably call the police, but David hesitated. The hall cameras don't record, they're just live feed. Of course they were. A few days after leaving the workplace, I took out my phone. I phoned 911 with trembling fingers. A dispatcher answered. What emergency do you have? I took a deep breath. Within 30 minutes, 2 officers, a man and a woman, entered my apartment and scanned the area as I explained the break-in, the lock, and the fact that someone had used a copy of my key while I was at work. Officer Patel asked, "You're sure this wasn't here before?" Patel asked positive, and I replied, "I would have noticed." She nodded and tested the lock. The person who installed this was skilled. Officer Green pointed to my front door and showed no traces of forced entry, so they either had a duplicate of your key or got in some other way. It's drilled and clean. There is no damage to the door frame, and my stomach is bent, indicating it wasn't a hurried job. The landlord said it was my key card, although I wasn't there when the apartment records showed an entrance at 2:34 p.m. yesterday. Patel and Green shared a glance that transformed the situation, and Green stated if someone had cloned your key, they may return at any moment. My flesh pricked. Could you look for fingerprints? The surface is too smooth, and if they were attentive, they most likely wiped it off, Patel said, shaking her head. Green closed his notebook. Do you know who may be interested in doing this? I hesitated, but I said, no, I don't have any enemies or stalkers. I live alone, and I don't give out my key. The cops seem to be certain that anybody could enter your flat in the past. Patel asked a friend or ex. I started to say anything, but then I stopped because I realized it was a former roommate, not an ex or friend. 6 months ago, I had briefly lived with someone named Daniel. We had only been roommates for a couple of months before I asked him to leave. He made me uncomfortable, not in a violent way. He was never aggressive, but in a quiet, unsettling way. He always knew too much about my schedule, always hovered a little too close, and once I caught him going through my closet when I got home from work early. I had confronted him about it and he laughed, brushed it off like it was nothing. That night, I decided I didn't want to live with him anymore. I gave him 2 weeks to move out. He left without argument, but now what if he never really left? I told the officers everything. Patel's expression darkened. Did he ever return his key when he moved out? I felt my stomach drop. I don't know, I admitted. I assumed he did. Green scribbled something in his notepad. Do you have his last name? I nodded and gave them what little I knew. I didn't have his number anymore, but I still had old messages from when we first moved in. Together, Patel took a deep breath. We'll look into him. In the meantime, you need to stay somewhere else tonight. I exhaled, realizing how tense my body had been. Yeah, I already planned on it. Green handed me a card and said, call us if anything else happens and don't go home alone until we clear this up. I took the card, my fingers still shaking, and left that night to stay with a friend across town. I had a feeling I knew exactly who it was, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel waiting outside my bedroom door, testing the lock. The next day, the police called and discovered Daniel living in an empty apartment on my floor. The apartment had been unoccupied for months, but the landlord had never changed the locks. While the police examined Daniel's home, they discovered tools, extra keys, a notebook with dates and times recording my schedule, and, worst of all, a second lock. Daniel must have copied his previous key and moved in while no one noticed. Another lock, much like the one he put on my door, even though he is in jail for breaking and entering, trespassing, and attempted unlawful imprisonment. I still check my doors every night because the thing that worries me the most isn't that he locked my bedroom door, but rather that he may have done it while I was asleep. The officers told me something I'll never forget. He was planning to do this to your front door. I moved out the same week and changed my number to make sure Daniel couldn't find me. When you work in a cafe, you get used to seeing the same people. Morning routines, afternoon study sessions, and the pair who never tips but always divides a muffin. After working here for over 2 years, I've gotten to know most of the individuals that come in, and I even know some of them by name, like Mark. One of the more reserved regulars, Mark always arrived at the same time just before the morning rush, ordered a black coffee, and sat at the farthest table by the window. He was the kind of customer you hardly noticed until he noticed me. He was never aloof, just aloof, and never made small talk or lingered. He always paid in cash. I had just finished boiling milk for a latte a week after I had relocated when I felt like I was being watched. I looked up. Mark was at his usual table watching me, which was strange because he never watched anyone. I forced a polite smile before he turned back to the espresso machine, brushing it off as if I was dreaming. Then, when I handed him his coffee, he spoke first, which was also strange because he never started conversations. I blinked. Sorry. Mark tilted his head slightly. In your apartment you like it made my stomach drop. I hadn't told anyone I moved for a second, and I wasn't sure how to react. I hadn't mentioned moving at work, I hadn't updated my address on social media, and I hadn't told anyone but my landlord and a few close friends. Mark should not have known. I forced a laugh. How did you? Mark just smiled, lucky guess, and left before I could question him. The fact that he said it so casually, as if we had discussed it before, made my skin crawl. I spent the rest of my shift trying to convince myself that I was overreacting, but the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe early, and I told myself that I just wanted to clear my head before the rush, but in reality, I wanted to see if Mark would say anything else at 7:45 a.m. Sharp Mark stared at me yesterday, his face inscrutable, and he moved toward the counter with the same blank look in slow, methodical strides. I stiffened as I rang up his customary black coffee, my fingers hovering over the register before I forced myself to speak. You never answered my question. I swallowed hard, wondering how he knew I had moved. He gazed for a while, then smiled the same kind but vacant grin as yesterday. You just seem different, he murmured softly, suggesting that maybe this was a new beginning. The way he said it, as if he knew something I didn't, caused my hands tighten into fists, and I felt my stomach churn. It wasn't a response, but rather a diversion. Just like yesterday, Mark took his coffee and left, and I stood there frozen, watching him sit by the window as if nothing had happened. By the time my shift ended, I had persuaded myself that I needed to check my apartment, and the first thing I did when I got home was make sure my locks were deadbolt locked. Windows closed tightly, nothing seemed amiss, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I was about to give up when I noticed something that made my skin crawl, the coat rack near my door. I always kept 3 jackets on it, one for work, one for cold days, and one that I hardly wore at all, but now there were only two left, and the third was gone. I stood there, gasping for air, wondering if I had moved it or stuffed it in a closet and forgotten. I checked the hallway outside my apartment, but nothing was there, and it was just gone. A slow, chilling realization crept up my spine. Someone had been in my apartment, and whoever they were, they had taken something small that I wouldn't notice right away. I locked the door and backed away from it, my mind racing, and then, as if the universe wanted to confirm my worst fear, my phone buzzed a text message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. "Red looks good on you." My throat went dry. I didn't own anything red except the missing jacket. A wave of nausea hit me. I forced myself to type out a response. "Me, who is this?" No answer. I tried calling straight to voicemail. I felt exposed, vulnerable. Watched. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my keys, shoved my phone into my pocket, and left, because right now I couldn't be in that apartment, and if Mark knew where I lived, I wasn't going back there alone. I didn't go back to my apartment that night. I crashed on my friend Matt's couch instead, though I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone standing outside my door, or worse, already inside. And the text "Red looks good on you," it wouldn't leave my head. Who sent it? How did they get my number? And most importantly, was it Mark? By morning I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't live in my apartment knowing someone had been inside. I had to figure out how they got in. So after a few hours of debating, I finally forced myself to go back. Matt offered to accompany me, but I declined. I'm not sure why. Perhaps I was worried about coming across as paranoid, or perhaps I just didn't want anyone else to realize how terrible this was. Regardless, I went alone, and as soon as I entered, I knew something wasn't right. The air felt different, like someone had been there, but nothing seemed out of place. There was no forced entry, and no broken locks. I took another look in the closet. When I turned to face the mirror, I noticed something written on it, not in marker or pen, but in steam, as if someone had stood in my bathroom after taking a shower and used the condensation to leave me a message. The jacket was still missing, so I did something I hadn't done before. At first, everything seemed normal: the sink, the shower, the toothbrush, which I had left out in a hurry this morning. I backed out of the bathroom as my breath came in shallow bursts. The texts, the missing jacket, the message on the mirror, and my stomach turned into knots as I moved closer. The faint letters became clearer, and then I saw two words: "See you." I felt my knees weaken because I hadn't taken a shower that morning, meaning whoever wrote this had been in my apartment while I was away. I quickly left the flat after grabbing my keys, hardly remembering to lock the door. As soon as I was outside, I contacted the police and handed them all of my messages. When I told them about Mark and how he knew I had moved before I told anyone about how he always watched me, their interest peaked, so they asked, "Do you have any proof that he's been inside your apartment?" I hesitated. "Do you have any proof that he's been inside your apartment?" To my surprise, they actually took me seriously. An officer met me at my apartment and did a full walkthrough, checking every room and every possible entry point. There was no sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing. "No," the officer groaned, "and at this point, the only thing we can do is file a complaint and replace your locks. Be careful who you talk to, and call us right away if anything else happens." 2 weeks ago, Mark stopped coming to the cafe, and his usual table by the window was empty. No one seemed to care where he went, and the strangest part was that there were no more strange texts or signs of anyone inside my apartment. It seemed like whoever had been watching me had moved on, and I should feel relieved and safe. But I don't, because someone still has my jacket, my phone number, and someone who knew exactly where I lived before I told anyone decided to vanish. But I don't think they're gone. I think they're just waiting for something I don't know, and I don't want to find out.